Thank you for tapping into Reflections on Malcolm X, through the 1990 Malcolm X Radical Tradition and a Legacy of Struggle Conference. This is part 2, Black Workers and Malcolm X. In this series, Africa World Now Project is sharing some of the sessions from this conference in an effort to engender serious engagement with Malcolm, not in the narrow confines of him as an individual or pigeonhole him to moments or sound bites, but to identify the tradition that produced Malcolm as a nexus, a point of entry for many seriously trying to figure out what is to be done. More than this, we encourage you to visit Dr. Abdul Akalimat's website to explore, read, and hear more of the conference. The archive link will be available in the description section as you locate the program via various podcast platforms. What we will hear next in the following order: Ashaki Benta with Black Workers for Justice, General Baker, League of Revolutionary Black Workers, and Saladin Muhammad, Black Workers for Justice. Our show was produced today in solidarity with the Native, Indigenous, African, and Afro-descendant communities at Standing Rock, Venezuela, Corporation Jackson in Jackson, Mississippi, Brazil, the Avalon Village in Detroit, Colombia, Kenya, Palestine, South Africa, Ghana, Haiti, and other places who are fighting for the protection of our land for the benefit of all peoples. Listen intently, think critically, act accordingly.
Good afternoon, brothers and sisters. I've been really inspired by the first two presentations, and especially enjoyed both sets of comments about Brother Malcolm. And I guess we feel that one of the things that Malcolm would want now is for us to move forward with programs to address the real conditions and needs of our people. So I've been asked to comment on the work of the Black Workers for Justice and what we're doing. The Black Workers for Justice is a black liberation organization with a focus and program for organizing workers and bringing an organized labor concentration to the National Black Liberation Movement for national liberation. We were founded in 1981, directly out of an indigenous struggle against discrimination and economic injustice by 3 black women workers from a Kmart store in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. With the time limitations that we have, I guess the details on our founding and early development might not be warranted right now, but I did want to make a few comments on the socioeconomic conditions in the Black Belt that have undergirded the development of the Black Workers for Justice. Certain socioeconomic conditions characterize the Black Belt South today, which constitutes the framework for the development of basic organizations in the South, such as the Black Workers for Justice, and provide for us our parameters for operations with both limitations and opportunities and certain necessary problems that our work has been forced to address. 2 predominant characteristics shape the conditions of the African American people in the Black Belt today. Number 1, between 1974 and 1985, more than 5.2 million jobs were relocated to the South. Between 1974 and 1985, more than 5.2 million jobs were relocated to the South, demonstrating a major shift in the U.S. imperial estate economic structure, which of course was global in its parameters, but which also changed the economic character of the South and vastly increased the trend of runaway South from the North to the South, which had began in the early 60s. Investing in anti-labor policies, which were the cornerstone of the Reagan-Bush New Right administration. Consequently, organized labor itself has taken a broadside hit, while corporations and at least parts of industries have moved into the unorganized and underdeveloped Black Belt South. And yet the South has remained the poorest region in the United States. Secondly, roughly 53% of all African American people still reside in the Black Belt South. In over 90 counties, we constitute still the majority, or at least 50% or more, of the population in those counties. And as a mere reflection of the political powerlessness of the African American community in the South, I just want to cite some information about black elected officials. In January of 1989, there were only 7,190 black people elected to office in the U.S. 4,800 of those elected were from the South. Of that 4,800, roughly 3,000 held positions at the city and county level, 200 at the U.S. State legislative level, 400 in law enforcement, and about 900 in educational positions. Consequently, in terms of laws, policies, and the social context of the South, it remains the bastion of right-to-work laws and hire and fire at will laws, as well as low wages and a pervasive character of underdevelopment, especially in the Black, Indian, and poor rural areas of the South, which is the Black Belt. And this also has meant the lack of meaningful control over the institutions that affect our lives on a day-to-day basis. In 1987, median income for a Black male worker in the South was only $11,000. For a Black female worker in the South, the median income was $6,700. In the South, more than 34% of the Black population lives below the so-called government poverty level, which is only $12,000. Black workers can simply be characterized in the South as the working poor, with the Black woman worker at the extreme end of that. 34% of all Southern Black families are headed by females. These are roughly the conditions in the South that has kind of shaped the development of the BWFJ. I want to talk a little bit about our program. Over the years, the tenets of our work have evolved to include these areas of concentration. Number one, we call for the building of a labor movement in the South with an industrial concentration as the framework for its organization. This call is rooted in the focus upon the need for trade unions to build in the South. The BWFJ over the years has worked with various trade unions. We've helped to organize certain campaigns. Members of our organization are also members of trade unions such as they exist in the South. Secondly, we call for a definite unity between the struggle for Black political power in the South and the building of the labor and trade union movement. As an example, for more than 3 years, members of the BWFJ worked in the majority Black town of Keysville, Georgia, helping to build this movement for reactivation. We worked in Fremont, North Carolina over the years, helping to establish the first Black elected officials in that small town. We've worked in communities such as Shiloh, and many other smaller communities, but which really constitute majority Black freeholds or strongholds in the South. Number three, the building and constant convening of the Black United Front in the South and nationally, and the building and consolidation of a solidarity movement throughout the country with the movement to organize the South and to build trade unions and to fight for Black political power. These three factors are kind of the thrust of our program. In terms of our operations and methods, the Black Workers for Justice publishes a newspaper, Justice Speaks, once a month, 11 times a year. We formed a trade union commission, which has been focusing on the question of industrial development, how to bring that about. Their concentration has been on the poultry industry, which is largely, if not totally, situated itself in the South, and basically has a workforce of Black women workers and some extreme problems. So we've been working on an industrial approach to that industry. We have formed that was formed in 1985. In 1985, we also formed the Women's Commission. That commission has been formed to address the particular problems that women workers are confronted with in the South, anchoring ourselves in the struggle against sexism and male chauvinism, both in our community and within the broader society, and particularly in the workplace, as women workers face that. And we've seen the differences in wages. Some of the work that we've done over the years, I would just like to mention a few of the things that we've been involved in. In 1988, the Black Workers for Justice helped to lead a struggle against the plant closing in the South, which was a Sledge Lot Company. This was a division of Ingersoll Rand, which is a major international conglomerate, or whatever they call themselves now. And This was a very successful campaign which helped workers to struggle against this plant closing and demonstrated that a struggle could take place and force the company to give concessions to the workers before it was able to close its doors, and that struggle is still continuing today with the effects that that company has left in North Carolina before it closed and moved to Mexico. That was a major important campaign in the area where we were working, and it's still having its effect upon the consciousness and organization of the working class, particularly in North Carolina. In 1989, the BWFJ launched the Workers Want Fairness campaign, which is a campaign building and calling for the building of a labor movement in the South. Through that campaign, we've begun a broader effort to build and sustain in-plant committees within a number of the workplaces. These are not the first in-plant committees that we form by any means in plants, but at the level that it's operating now, it represents an advance in some of the work that's been developing. The Fairness Campaign has also been making a concerted effort to educate the national community about conditions of workers in the South, the need to build a labor movement in the South, the need for trade unions to come south. We've been reaching out and trying to educate a number of the trade unions and encouraging them to come south and begin organizing again. We also participated as a part of this fairness campaign in 1990 in what we called an Organize the South Midwest Solidarity Tour. And through this tour, we took 18 workers. We took 18 workers to the Midwest, and we traveled to Detroit, Michigan, Cleveland, Ohio, Chicago, Illinois, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we also had a stop in Erie, Pennsylvania. And through this tour, in the effort to build the tour, there was a formation of solidarity committees. Solidarity committees were organizing in the South in each of these cities, and those committees are ongoing at this time in terms of the work that they're doing to educate people and to bring more attention and support and resources to an organized movement in the South in terms of building a labor movement. Also, an aspect of the Workers Want Fairness campaign has been to call for, and this is something that we're still working toward, the convening of a massive labor conference in the South, which can hopefully consolidate a program of how to move forward, with the participation of the trade unions and bringing forward the black community as a united front into that with the ministers and other community leaders participating in it, but to make a concerted effort to really organize the South and to focus on it as a labor movement throughout the U.S. And recently, as a part of the Workers Want Fairness campaign, we have launched the Rehire Iron Vest campaign. And this campaign was initiated because upon our return to the South after the Midwest tour, one of our members and one of the workers in the plant who had organized to elect a union in the plant was asked to, and they were defeated by the company. But a number of the workers there who the company considered to be leaders or a threat to keeping the union out over the long term were harassed, and one sister in particular was fired, who had worked in that plant for 18 years and had an excellent work history. And the solidarity committees that have been functioning across the South have now taken up the Rehire Iron Vest campaign because this campaign brings forward the whole question of the right of Southern workers to organize. And it is also a fight for this sister to win her job back. And we've been here this week, in the week previous to the Malcolm X conference in New York, where a new solidarity committee has formed on a speaking tour where we've met with the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, a number of international representatives, some church leaders, and a number of other trade unionists throughout New York, and have presented the story of her firing and also the story of the conditions in the South and the struggle that needs to be waged to organize trade unions in the South. This has been a great campaign. Yesterday we were a part of the Daily News rally. They have rallies downtown. There was a massive rally in which Jesse Jackson spoke, and we also were speakers at that rally, raising up the Rehire Iron Vest campaign and the conditions of workers in the South. listen to my work. Thank you.
I'd like to start with Brother General Baker in terms of his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Brothers and sisters, fellow workers and friends, it's a real honor for me today here to share this podium with Ida Mae, Brother Gordon, Sister Shaki, Sister Via. It's really a pleasure to share a podium and try to express some of our views with such a distinguished audience and panel. I want to deviate for a minute from the critical question we're faced with to make a few comments in regard to, the spirit of Malcolm X and what that meant for a lot of us. In reviewing history in a lot of ways, some of you may be familiar with the fact that Malcolm X often spent a lot of time in the city of Detroit. His two most famous speeches, Message to the Grassroots and Ballad of the Bullets, was made at the King Solomon Baptist Church on 14th and McGraw, in the city of Detroit in 1963 and 1964, respectively. And those things, go to heart quite a ways with myself and the rest of us that was around the city of Detroit fighting in that day, groping in the dark, trying to find our way. In a lot of ways, his militancy that he presented in those speeches, kind of goes to heart. If you ever had a chance to really listen to in detail the Message to the Grassroots, when Malcolm is presenting the passage on the fact that you fight when the white man tells you to fight, you die when the white man tells you to die. But when it comes time to killing little black babies and black women, you're afraid to bleed. In the background, you can hear somebody hollering, "We'll bleed." Well, I want to tell you that was us there hollering in that audience there. And that's what it meant for us in a lot of ways. And I need to say that because I think it was the spirit of Malcolm in those days. We were young, 22, 23 years old. When he used to come to town, he was being enlightened, and it would boost us in a lot of ways. Along with that, and listening to some of the words of Robert F. Williams on Radio Free Dixie at night on Friday nights when he was broadcasting from Cuba, that gave us the kind of strength and fortitude that allowed us to become more than just weekend militants. We would come in the parks in the weekends and wear dashikis and talk stuff. And we'd elect the black people's parliament in the park and go all day long back to work from Monday and Friday, kowtowing, to the bosses at work without trying to take that fight into the workplace. And I need to say that about Malcolm, because I think that in the spirit of time, this is the only kind of place I got to present that, because it meant so much for us back in those days. I got an old historic document here, if I could deviate for just a minute, and you got to excuse its raggedy form, but it's an old document, and it's called The Black Vanguard. I can just show you how beat up it is. But, it was Malcolm's work and stuff at that time that inspired us to attempt to try to organize black workers back in that day. And this is volume 1, number 3, dated March the 20th, 1965. This is about 1 month after Malcolm was there. And we had an article that we distributed inside the shops to the black workers there called The Man Who Shot Malcolm. I just want to read a couple of passages of it from you so you can kind of understand where we were then and what it means for us today. And, quote, "The important thing now is that black men must understand that the plot has meant to frighten us and to bring a halt to the struggle. The real struggle against racist domination and exploitation. It was part of a shoddy plan conceived of and deprived racist enemies of our race who have good reason to fear militancy among black men. But African Americans can and must see through these lousy tricks. We must now strive forward with even more fortitude and more dedication in our struggle for freedom. The tricks of our enemies can no longer work. We will be free. We feel that Malcolm X should be remembered as he actually existed a month ago. We know that all sorts of opportunists, religious fanatics, and the like will attempt to profit by his death. Some will set him up as the new Jesus Christ. Others will claim that he did and said things which he did not. And still others will claim that only they were the true followers of Malcolm. We feel that any attempt to portray Malcolm as anything that he was not shows a lack of respect for the man and his family. We therefore remember Malcolm as a man of whom we often agreed with and often did not. But nonetheless, he was and lives on in our memories as a man for whom we have the deepest respect and admiration. He was a freedom fighter, and his death, like the death at any time, in any place, was a tragic blow to all freedom-loving peoples of the world. To Betty Shabazz and his children, we extend our deepest sympathies. And to Malcolm, in respect to your beliefs and your religion, we leave you with the universal farewell in the Islamic tradition. Assalamu alaikum. May peace be unto you, Brother Malcolm, at last and forevermore. I just wanted to read that to you because that was expressed a month after Malcolm was killed in our attempt back in Detroit to try to express ourselves and try to take that to the working people back in that city. And this is the only point in the agenda that I could find to say that, and I think it needed to be said. If we move on then to the points that we got to make here today, I just want to say that the kind of category that we're trying to speak on is the unity among black workers in the struggle against economic barbarism. And in order to express that, I'd like to state it backwards first, try to deal with the question of economic barbarism that we're faced with, and then proceed to try to talk about the kind of unity that we want amongst workers. I want to say that, our experience back in the city of Detroit and trying to organize auto workers, was a long and tedious struggle. This was printed in 1965. We continued to fight in the trenches day by day to try to agitate amongst black workers there, and we only finally hit home 3 years later. It was 1968, so that meant 3 years of difficult struggle, fighting to try to agitate and find our way in the course of struggle, to find the spark that would try to lead us in some kind of way to organize black workers in a way that was real meaningful for the black liberation struggle. Those 3 years, in that 3 year period of time, was not a year of peace. It was years in which, Malcolm's battle cry of freedom by any means necessary rang throughout the country, not only from the Watts Rebellion, the Detroit Rebellion in 1967, the rebellions in the streets of Cleveland in 1966. All those things led to a point, in which it got to the struggle for the point of production, where black workers became agitated to the point they were prepared to take a stand and to carry that struggle into the shops. I think one important thing for us to understand is that what happened in that period of time, and the kind of conditions that we fought under and the kind of conditions that we resisted. What became our homes in the auto factories at that time, in case you may not be too familiar with the automobile factory, was that the body shops, the departments 9150 that referred to them, and the paint shops were the homes of black workers. The hot, heavy, dirty jobs in the auto plants were the places that we find ourselves. In the steel mills, it was the coke ovens and the blast furnaces and those areas that we populated. It was there for those areas that became our hotbed of agitation. There was those departments that sprung forth the leadership of the struggle in that period. You got to understand that our struggle and agitation out of the drum movement, when we set Congo drums up at the plant gates and demanded the workers withhold their labor, and when we hit home that day, that it was those departments that withheld their labor. It was those departments that shut down those plants. The union officials ran out of town. We didn't hold a single position inside the shop. It was a rank and file movement that led to those shutdowns, and I think you need to know that and understand what it meant for us in a lot of ways. They declared those strikes in 1968 to be extra legal. They were afraid to bother them on the basis of the critical question that we posed. They didn't say they were illegal, they said they were extra legal. In the first strike at Dodge in May of 1968, we lost no casualties in there. They fired nobody in the course of that strike. They were afraid to bother it. Those struggles went on, and clearly 1 year later, when we struck the Elgin plant and closed down most of the crisis facilities around the country, they struck back then in a dramatic way and fired 29 people, picking up many of those that weren't involved in the strike. I want to mention those things to you because that was a period of time of expansion in the economy. And that's different from what we're faced with today. That we remember in 1967, after the rebellions, that Ford Motor Company set up a hiring block on Grand Boulevard in the city of Detroit and hired 5,000 people in a matter of 3 months. They call it hardcore program. We remember when General Motors would send buses down 12th Street to pick up people and drive them 25 miles to factory jobs in the city of Detroit. That was a period of economic expansion that we were faced with. And it's critical that we understand that as we grope today to try to find our way. That was a period of time where we saw the imperceptible and insignificant electronic changes taking place in the industry. That's a period of time when we talked about the automaton and the cybernetic machine. Mechanical arms were coming into the plant and replacing one worker here, one worker there. That therefore we were faced with a massive amount of speed up. And I don't know if you remember the old blues tune that grew out of that period by Joel Carter that talked about, please, Mr. Foreman, slow down this assembly line. That I don't mind working, but I do mind dying. There was a period of time of massive speed up as these electronic arms replaced workers one by one, and we were facing these things. We often call it not automation, but we refer to it as niggermation in a lot of plants. They hired so many black workers and worked us to death, and we refer to it that way openly and blatantly because that's the best way we could find at the time to express it. Things have changed today. And I wanted to tell you that because I think if we don't understand fundamentally that we're faced with a revolution in the means of production and what we're faced with back in the city of Detroit. A modern day assembly plant in the automobile industry today, if you look at it, has no labor in the body shop. It's not a single human being stock welding in the body shop that used to be our home. It's all robots. When you go to the paint shop, it's not a human being in the paint shop. It's all robots today. You go to Pole Town and Orion Township, and you go to Oklahoma and Shreveport, Louisiana, and look at what we got. We got a revolution in the means of production. When we look at the coke ovens and blast furnaces and the steel mills that have closed down all over the country, we got a fundamental break with the old methods, no longer insignificant, imperceptible technical change, but a revolution in the means of production itself. That coke ovens and blast furnaces are being replaced with mini mills and electric arc furnaces that no longer have coke production, that no longer have blast furnace production. They use an electric furnace and a concaster, and some of them operate making almost 200,000 tons in a year's time with a few laborers and 80 people inside the shop. We're faced with a revolution in the means of production, and I think if we don't understand that in the course of what we do, then we miss a critical point in our course of our development. I want to say that oftentimes with the technical might, a lot of us got caught up in the claptrap. Back in the late 70s, we were talking about what automation meant and what new technology meant and what these things brought us. And I want to read for you a couple of examples of this claptrap that we're talking about. It says, there proceeds a widespread belief that computerization and automation and the use of robotic equipment will free human beings from soul-destroying, routine, back-breaking tasks and leave them free to engage in more creative and fulfilling activities. It is further suggested that it will automatically lead to a shorter working week, longer holidays, and more leisure time. And that's what we were told in the 70s. We used to talk that stuff ourselves, that the computer is going to create more jobs than it eliminates. Many of us heard that, and it was spoken over and over again. Nothing could be further than the truth. The people that used to work in the body shops and paint shops are now living under bridges and shelters, and find themselves sleeping in parks and picking up food in order to have something to eat the next day. In the city of Detroit alone, there are almost 29 plants that have closed since 1970, yet auto production remains the same. Dodge Main is closed, Hoover Avenue Foundry is closed, Lynch Road is closed, Mack Avenue Staffing is closed, Werner Trim is closed, Flat Rock Foundry closed, Coke Ovens closed, Universal closed, Export-Import closed. None of the trade union officials or elected officials want to stand up and admit all the plants that closed because just announcing them alone is an indictment of their activity and their fight to keep jobs. I think that should be understood when we face this thing, because if we don't understand that fundamentally something has changed in the course of production, then we miss our ability to try to organize in the proper kind of way. I have before me here just a little example. In 1985 and 1986, the Ford Motor Company invested $150 million in the production of a new Coke battery. That Coke battery was the newest battery on the face of Earth. We had its first push on April the 16th, 1986. I want to show you here what they done. They gave each worker a piece of Coke that came out of the first oven when it was pushed. That date is April the 16th, 1986. April the 27th, 1987, that battery was closed, shut down tight, sitting there with weeds and grass growing on the top of the battery because they no longer need the Coke production. I just want to kind of show you the kind of might that we're faced with in terms of the amount of industrial capital that's being produced and invested, and all the training that we went through was thrown to waste because of the amount of money in the hands of those that we work for is so tremendous that they throw one job out today and take a tax break on it tomorrow. That's just a replica of all of us that pushed Coke that first day, and all of us still have that sitting at home. I want to say that because I think it's important that we understand that. If we don't understand the course in which we got to drag and fight. For the young people in the audience, I just wanted to indicate that this, and when we look at industries, a lot of things are happening. When we look at the steel industry, I think Nippon Steel Company of Japan announced earlier this year that they're producing the first unmanned integrated steel mill on Earth, and it'll be on track by 91. That means they will have a fully integrated steel mill producing coke, blast furnace, iron, and concasting at the end with no human labor. Once that technology, we understand, is in place in Japan, it'll be immediately exported here. In the auto shops, it looked like that we probably will stand up a little longer with a little human labor left because they haven't got a robot that can climb in and out of the car right now and put the cloth on the top of the ceiling and install the dashboard. It seems as though that perhaps before we got another probably 10 years before that kind of technology will replace those jobs in that position. But I think unless we understand that every day, the advance of technology, and the use of robotics and electronics in industry and the lack of the necessities for human labor presses upon us. And unless we understand that fundamentally and have that in our consciousness, then we can't proceed to the next step to understand how do we go about organizing, who are these workers we're talking about organizing, where do we find them all? And I think as we can understand those fundamental things, then it can kind of lead us on the proper track. When we move to the point, in a lot of ways, this technological development is developing in different ways. Sometimes they're offering up whole new cities. The Nucor Steel Company in Charlotte, North Carolina, put on track last year the first thin slab caster in Crawfordsville, Indiana. They announced 2 weeks ago that they will build another thin slab caster in Mississippi County, Arkansas, between Osceola and Blytheville. That we got to understand, I think when we look at these new assembly plants, we find them in Marysville, Ohio, not Cleveland. We find them in East Liberty, Ohio for Honda, not Cleveland. We find them in Smyrna, Tennessee. We find them in Orion Township. We find them in Wentzville, Missouri. We find them in Fort Wayne, Indiana, Fairfax, Kansas, Normal, Illinois, Georgetown, Kentucky, and Lafayette, Indiana. All new towns that's being built with new technology plants, and these plants employing only a fraction of the labor that used to exist there. In other places, we find new computerization and robotation existing side by side with auto workers. You go through the frame plant in a hot summer day. We go through the frame plant in a hot summer day, and it's not uncommon to see a robot standing here with 3 fans fanning the robot from each side because it got to stay cool. And a whole line of black workers with sweatbands and water bottles trying to stay cool while they work next to the robot that's feeding the line. Those are the kind of conditions we face with. We've seen both kinds. Some coming building whole new cities and destructions of others, and others we've seen side by side mechanical labor and electronic labor working side by side. I think it's important to understand that, and most of us got the task of trying to understand how this thing is going to take place in our various industries, because the technological revolution or electronic revolution is full force upon us. Clearly, any revolution in production can't help but lead to a social upheaval. And so I think when we reach the first part of the question about the necessity of the unity of black workers, it's clear to us we got to be clear on who we're talking about. We're talking about those that would be employed when they find themselves laying in shelters and on welfare. Those that, laying on park benches, and those that still working got to be united in one collective effort. And we got to understand, I think, that a lot of our leaders, I think one of the brothers mentioned last night, the fact that we got so many of these black leaders in the trade union movement, we got to understand the dubious role they play oftentimes. I never forget in 1967 during the riots, after we had defeated Detroit Police Department and the Michigan State Police, and they were waiting for the 101st Airborne to arrive, that they sent these black trade union leaders down 12th Street trying to tell us to go home. I'll never forget standing there looking at Congressman Conyers, Congressman Diggs, Buddy Battle, Horace Sheffield and other trade union leaders driving down the street on the trailer saying go home. And we told them politely, you go home because we at home. And I think we got to understand the task that we got something to do. The task that we got in front of us today is a similar one, that we got to organize these workers wherever we find them. We got to organize them in a unified effort, understanding whether you're working or not working, that you belong to this class. We got to break down the distinctions by talking about welfare cheats and what have you. The most organized sections of the unemployed are homeless union and national welfare rights. 70% of the unemployed people don't draw no check nowhere. So you can't find them in organizations. And those, in that sense, those kind of organizations is where we got to find the solidarity we got to build with those that's employed and those that's not employed. I think with those kind of marching orders, then we spoke to the question of black unity and why we got to do it. Other than that, we face the economic barbarism, this electronic revolution that's eliminating all human labor and throwing us all asunder. I want to thank you for that opportunity.
Yes, I Yes, check it out. My sound surround like a crown of thorns stuck into the planet. Another MCs is left stranded. A flow breaststroking, they leather neck stretched open. Freak style forever wet, soaking. Keep your lady open, most handsome. I propose a toast to the fifth, Dinah's anthem. Fierce frequency, pierce your eardrum. Hip hop, continuous grind. Trying to come up in a strenuous time. Yo, here come the prime culprit. Leaving weak rappers insulted. My pen vultures a shot. The paper that drop, the flavor that defy nature. A message to the fraudulent squad. I hate ya, you're blowing me. What the fuck you really showing me? Yo, you can't rock, you get dropped out position. It's poetry to make the best glisten and make the rest just listen. You acting like I'm speaking Mexican. Dig it, I'm Black Thought from the fifth end. My style changed like a deranged, psychopathic. Strangely I jam just like traffic. The exquisite, vivid, graphic. Live it authentic while you represent plastic. Yo, LPs get bent backwards, stepping into the dark. When I enclose the park like steel fences, I'm only inches away from the DJ by the benches and attack loops and sequences. I backslap an MC senseless. Represent this illa fifth type. Dundee might wrangle a missing link. I outthink, then overangle ya. Perform your murder on camera, then confess, then testify with the medical examiner. The roots is the top notch. Ask your manager, any veteran in my regiment, I handle a mic on point like a tip that's hollow and flip shit for your click to swallow. To all the dreamers you initiated, now follow the fifth Dundee, the concerto of the desperado. This rap shit within my brain like a tumor while constructing the rhyme. I serve the consumer that's worthy to bless whoever heard me. When I start touching it, don't.
Next we will hear from Saladin Muhammad, who is from the Black Workers for Justice, headquartered in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. And he will come before you at this time to talk a bit about the current struggles being waged by his particular organization, as well as to deal with some additional comments about other struggles going on in the South. And we would like at this time to welcome Mr.
Good afternoon. I had to bear with me. I'm always nervous when I'm trying to deal with critical questions. So I'm going to try to do the best I can in the interest of moving forward. I want to first make a couple of remarks that I think it has been a real serious problem, and it really reflects a weakness in the way we make analysis. When every time there's an analysis made about the material conditions of the South, it is always viewed as some ideological polemic. Our ability to really analyze the political economy of this country, to understand, how imperialism has been able to be strong, requires that we be prepared to make a sober analysis and not to be biased because of our particular ideological tendency against this or that way of thinking. Because independent of what we think, there's some real concrete conditions that exist in the South and that exist in the world that an effective analysis to advance our struggle must consider and must be based on. There's some thinking that, and I'm not a historian, but, certainly a lot of the history has been covered. But I think if we look at the 50s and 60s, there's a view that the defeat of of legal segregation, apartheid USA, has represented the end of the Solid South. That is, the uniform pattern and practices of southern states in its treatment of the African American masses. The reality of it is, the economic realities is that the Solid South essentially is united in terms of African American people being concentrated in a soup-exploited and a subjugated way. Some economists estimate that in 1984, the super profit that was made off of the oppression of the African American people throughout this country was $91 billion, half of which came from the South. But they also estimated that all of U.S. foreign investments taken together, its returns brought back $96 billion. So that says something about the oppression of African American people in this country and the particular character of the oppression in the South. Now that ain't got nothing to do with ideology, that's got something to do with the fact that this is a very powerful thing that we're dealing with, whatever we may think. The oppression of African American people in the South, even the gap between black and white workers in the South, shows that even of the working class in the South, that African American people are the most exploited in the South. And thus it is our super exploitation which more defines the character of the whole working class in the South, the white working class in the South, and not the highest stage of development of the U.S. capitalist system. Because if we try to look at the working class in the South from the standpoint of the highest stage of development of the U.S. capitalist system, we will think essentially that the white working class in the South has its interest more with the white working class in the North and not with the struggle of the African American masses for national liberation in the South. Because that is the reality of its condition, because it has also been victimized by the role that the South has played in the development of the U.S. imperialist economy. Following the Korean War, U.S. corporations developed manufacturing plants throughout the world, mainly in the Third World, employing 7 million workers following the Korean War. Let's ask the question, why didn't U.S. imperialism expand its manufacturing section to the South, to the Black Belt South, following the Korean War? I think when we look at the 60s, the late 60s and the 70s, we find the answer. Again, it's independent of ideology. We saw that the alignment, the anti-imperialist alignment was taking shape in Africa, Asia, and Latin America around the Vietnam War, which through the greatest resources of U.S. imperialism in trying to win that war, thus weakening its support of the colonial powers in Africa, Portugal, and the rest. Tilting the balance of power to send the African liberation struggles on the offensive there. Following the Vietnam War and during the Vietnam War, when you start to see the African liberation struggles develop, you saw a hell of a retreat of a number of corporations that had plants throughout Asia and Africa. And where did they come? They came to the South. So we begin to see that the South has historically been kept underdeveloped so that it could serve as a reserve to enable imperialism to develop and not be so easily destabilized because of its internationalization of capital. It has essentially played the role of a colony, an internal colony. I'm not arguing you understand all of the A's and B's of what a colony is. But that's what happened. But when we analyze what industries came in the South during the late 60s and the 70s, we find out that it was not only U.S. corporations, but it was the corporations of developed capitalist imperialist countries who were also in Africa, Asia, and in Latin America. There's more than 1,000 foreign-owned industries in the South today. Japan, Germany, Britain, right in the South. That means that the oppression of the South is not merely a factor of U.S. imperialism, it's a factor of the international imperialist system. It means you understand that the South, you understand, is subjugated and nationally oppressed like a semi-colony. Again, we're not arguing ideas. We're arguing what the materialist reality is in this country. The restructuring of the U.S. economy taking shape in the 70s, we saw that major industry in the North were being not absolutely phased out, but decentralized. If you remember, the first wave, you understand, of restructuring was when you saw major departments of plants being phased out. And therefore, you had plants only making part of the commodity. Well, there were new plants who were subcontractors developing in the South, making it look like, there was a different industrial character. But let me show you a phenomenon that we experienced in the South, in North Carolina. You got workers who work in the automobile industry, who make dashboards, who don't have industrial consciousness, because our relationship to the centers of U.S. capital is different. They think they belong to the dashboard industry. They think they belong to the windshield industry. They think they belong to the rubber molding industry. This is not ideological, brothers and sisters. This is based on the material relationship to the centers of U.S. imperialism and the role of the South and how we must understand it. It's not an ideological question. But what has anchored the South, shaped its character, and produced the most consistent social and progressive movement in the South? It's been the oppression, the national oppression of the African American people. That has been the basis of bringing about democracy and social progress, not only for the African American people in the South, but for the whole working class in the South. The national movement, the Southern movement, still exists in the South. But like any other movement, it has its own problems. It has fragmentation, disunity, it's a law, you got repressive forces, you understand, that's intimidating people. But it don't mean that the material basis of that movement don't exist. And that's what we have to deal with today. Let me move forward. Please have patience with me. So we see how the war helped to tilt the balance of power in favor of oppressed people's struggles against U.S. imperialism. Now, in the 70s, we also saw that the trade union movement was on the defensive. Now, how do you have a movement that only represents 15% of the whole U.S. working class be on the defensive, and it certainly was on the defensive in areas, you understand, where the center, where the highest stage of capitalism had developed, but in the Black Belt South and the South, you had virtually no unions in the main. Therefore, it weakened the workers' movement. It weakened the trade union movement throughout the rest of the country. Therefore, when we talk about the working class struggle and all our views are based on the workers of the vanguard, etc., well, we don't realize how weakened the organizations of the working class, how in fact weak the trade unions are. You got a trade union in the so-called most democratic country in the world that ain't got a labor party. It says something about how strong it is. I'm pro-trade union, I ain't anti, I'm absolutely pro. But the gains of the civil rights movement, the civil rights period, in order for us to advance in the South and throughout the rest of the country, then the balance of power must be affected. Anytime you got workers who can't wear a vote for Jackson button or to work without fear of losing their job, anytime a worker can't be on the picket line fighting against racist education in the schools because their boss is going to intimidate them, it means that the balance of power is not such that we can advance beyond the civil rights movement. That means that the workers from this movement who work in the shop, who can't stand with their children to fight against racist education, and because the trade union movement's on the defensive, have no choice but to come forward to take the lead to build worker structures and trade unions in order to affect that balance of power. And this is what is being produced gradually, coming from the most only progressive movement that has the democratic ideas that welcomes all people. The civil rights, the black power, the African American national liberation movement. This is the tendency that we represent. It's not no ideological tendency. We ain't no party. We coming from the working class, you know, as workers organizing. This is going to be the balance of power that we will need as we reunite the local struggles in the South and move forward challenging a South now that has a lot of industries, you know, that's going to intimidate the whole African American people by intimidating the African American working class. Wives, husbands, children, aunts, uncles, preachers, or nobody supports you when they say, well, you're automatically going to lose your job without a challenge. The question of the balance of power requires that our movement, the African American movement, you understand, be pro-trade union, pro-working class. And we come forward and organize those structures, or our ideas ain't going to do us no good. We're going to be isolated and wiped out. This serves the interest of empowering the whole working class throughout the country. This defines the role of the South. This defines the role of the African American movement in the South, which is the most oppressed section and vanguard of the entire African American people's movement in this country for national liberation. This defines the role. It means then that the organization of the African American National Liberation Movement must organize itself nationally throughout the country, but it must also organize itself in a concentrated way in the South, which is united with its national character, but that enables it to be able to address the particular contradictions that grow out of where it is being oppressed in relationship to the oppression of all African people and American people in this country by U.S. imperialism. And I think that's what we have to look at. Lastly, let me close by saying this, that the struggle against racism is a central aspect of our struggle. But our struggle is not a race struggle. It is a national liberation struggle. Race is a central and fundamental aspect of it. But underdevelopment, no power, these are questions which help define our national character, our national oppression. And if we don't understand that, then we're going to be confused all the time as leading a race struggle. We are a national liberation struggle. And our liberation, you understand, is the interest of all people. It certainly must be in our interest. But we believe that it is a democratic struggle in the interest of all people. And our struggle in the South, as a part of the struggle throughout the country, aims at freeing from U.S. imperialism and world imperialism the process of further developing society. Cabral said the process of developing the national productive forces so that people can have a better life to live. This is what our struggle represents. Therefore, the weight of imperialism, the weight of the crisis, the restructuring of the economy means that it will be extremely difficult for us to simply advance our struggle in the South through purely local forms of organization. Struggle in Rocky Mount, a struggle in here. These are important struggles, but we must focus on uniting these struggles here. We must focus on uniting them. Therefore, it is not the time, you understand, for us to just declare ourselves the vanguard, because no group has a base strong enough to affect the balance of power in the interest of our movement. We have to unite to unite through uniting the mass base of our movement. And it's on the basis of that some kind of vanguard that's tied, consolidated, united with the people and the demands will be built. And then we will be the beacon for all oppressed and progressive and working class people throughout this country and possibly throughout this world. Thank you.
Success be y'all.